Most people think speaking is about words, but it's not. Speaking is about power, the power to shape emotion, the power to unlock belief, the power to take what's invisible in your mind and make it undeniable in theirs. Speaking is not just a skill. It's a superpower. And if you master it, you don't just communicate, you command. Not through volume, not through pressure, but through presence. Because the truth is, people don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. And when you master speaking, you learn how to control that feeling. You learn to speak in a way that makes people lean in, not scroll past. You speak in a way that stops time, that stills the room, that shakes the soul. Not with hype, but with truth. Not with noise, but with clarity. Not with tricks, but with resonance. And the first thing you must learn is that your voice doesn't come from your throat. It comes from your conviction. You don't need to sound like someone else. You don't need perfect grammar, perfect tone, perfect cadence. You need alignment. When your words match your energy, when your heart is behind your message, when your belief is louder than your fear, you become unstoppable. Because great speaking isn't about performance. It's about alignment. It's not about sounding smart. It's about sounding real. And when you sound real, people feel you. They don't just hear your message, they recognize themselves in it. And that's when everything changes. That's when you stop talking at people and start talking into them. Speaking is not about information, it's about transformation. You're not here to impress, you're here to impact. To speak in a way that changes something inside the person listening. To speak in a way that makes someone say, I can't go back to who I was before I heard that. And to do that, you must speak with intention. You must speak from the center of your truth. Not just what's polished, not just what's practiced, but what's real. Speak from your scars, not your script. Speak from your experience, not your ego. Speak from the pain you've lived through, the wisdom you've fought for, the lessons you've bled to learn. That's the voice people will follow. That's the voice that changes rooms. And once you understand that power doesn't live in the words alone, it lives in the energy behind them, you begin to speak differently. You stop chasing perfection and start channeling presence. You stop rehearsing to be impressive and start grounding yourself to be impactful. Because your voice doesn't have to be loud to be felt. It has to be true. That's what shakes people. That's what makes them stop scrolling. That's what cuts through a world full of noise and lands straight in the chest. Great speakers are not remembered because they said what everyone else said. They're remembered because they meant it, because you could feel their story in their silence, because their pauses had weight, because their breath carried belief, because their delivery didn't beg for attention, it commanded respect. And that's your next shift. Your voice carries your identity. You cannot master speaking until you first master you, because people don't just hear your words, they feel your alignment. If you doubt yourself, your voice will tremble. If you shrink your truth, your voice will stutter. But when you stand in who you are, when you own your value, your vision, your voice, suddenly every word you say starts to land with power. Confidence doesn't come from what you know. It comes from what you've integrated, from what you've lived. Confidence is the echo of alignment. The voice that says, this message isn't theory, this is who I am. And when your speaking reflects that, you no longer have to push to be heard. People lean in because they can't ignore what feels real. Let's talk rhythm. Because how you deliver is as important as what you deliver. Speaking is music. It has tone, pace, breath, beat. A great speaker doesn't just talk, they compose. They understand tension and release. They use silence like punctuation. They don't rush to fill space. They let the message breathe. Because silence, when used well, doesn't lose attention, it deepens it. Your job is not to pour out everything you know. Your job is to deliver one truth so clearly, so cleanly, so confidently that it plants itself in the heart of the listener and takes root. That's how impact happens. Not through volume, not through speed, through precision. You don't need to speak faster, you need to speak truer. You don't need to sound smarter. You need to sound clearer. You don't need more words. You need more weight behind the ones you already have. That's how you master your speaking. That's how you turn your voice from a tool into a force. Because the greatest speakers are not the ones who speak the most, they are the ones who feel the deepest and dare to let others feel it too. If your words are polished but your soul is guarded, you'll be heard but never remembered. You'll be acknowledged but never felt. But when you speak with vulnerability, raw, honest, human, you don't just connect, you create trust. And in speaking, trust is everything. It's what opens hearts. It's what drops walls. It's what turns a message into a moment someone remembers forever. So speak from your wounds, not just your wins. Speak from the nights you almost gave up. Speak from the fears you outgrew. Speak from the loneliness you sat in when no one clapped and no one called and you still chose to rise. People don't follow perfection. They follow realness. And when you bring your whole self to the mic, not just your highlight reel, people feel safe to do the same in their lives. And that's where your influence expands. When your voice becomes more than words, it becomes permission. Permission to hope, permission to change, permission to be seen. And the key to that? Storytelling. Story is the language of the heart. Facts inform the mind, but stories move the soul. The brain may forget your steps and your strategies, but it will never forget how your story made someone feel. That one moment of honesty, of pain, of truth, of laughter. That's what lingers. That's what stays. That's what spreads. So tell your stories. Not for applause, but for connection. Tell them not to shine, but to serve. The stumbles, the doubts, the small victories, the turning points. Make people see the movie in their mind, not just hear the bullet points of your success. Because when someone can see themselves in your struggle, they trust your guidance. They don't just listen to you, they follow you. But it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Your emotional range is your greatest asset. Too many speakers sound like robots, flat, rehearsed, soulless. But you are not here to recite. You are here to resonate. Use your voice like a symphony, not for drama, but for depth. Let your passion rise. Let your truth drop. Let your tone match the moment. Speak from fire when fire is needed. Speak from stillness when stillness is called for. Because your voice can punch like thunder or whisper like prayer, and both can be unforgettable when they come from truth. And here's what you must understand. People don't follow the most polished speaker. They follow the most honest one, the most present one, the most grounded one. The one who stands in front of the room or the camera or the world and does not flinch, not because they know everything, but because they've lived what they speak. That's the voice the world is starving for. Then listen carefully, because this is where it all converges. This is where speaking becomes more than a skill. It becomes your signature, your fingerprint on every room you enter, your echo in every life you touch. You see, most people speak to be remembered, but the masters, they speak to remind people of who they are, of what they forgot, of the power that's been buried beneath fear and silence. Your job is not just to share information. Your job is to awaken something inside them that was asleep. Your words are not decoration, they are activation. And if you want your voice to live beyond the moment, beyond the platform, beyond the applause, then speak from a place deeper than performance. Speak from purpose. Because when you speak with purpose, you don't need to sell, you don't need to shout, you don't need to convince. Your presence becomes permission. And people follow that. Not because you asked, but because they felt called. And that's what true speaking does. It calls people forward. Out of fear, out of stagnation, out of mediocrity, into motion, into clarity, into transformation. That's what your voice is capable of. And when you realize that, when you finally accept the responsibility of your voice, you will never speak the same again. Every sentence becomes sacred. Every pause becomes powerful. Every story becomes a vessel. And you become the channel. You don't own the message. You carry it. You deliver it. You protect it. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to hear the exact words you've been called to speak. And it might not be perfect. It might not be viral. But it might just be the moment that changes everything for them. So speak with courage. Speak with clarity. Speak with fire. Speak like it matters, because it does. Your voice is not a tool, it's a torch. And the world is full of people walking through darkness, not because they lack talent, but because they've never heard a voice that reminded them of their light. Be that voice. Because when it's all said and done, no one will remember every word you spoke, but they will remember how your words moved them, how they walked away a little taller, a little clearer, a little more alive. And in the end, that is the true mastery of speaking. To use your voice, not just to impress, but to ignite. Not just to be heard, but to be felt. Not just to communicate, but to elevate. That is your gift. That is your power. That is your legacy. Use it well. Let me tell you something most people never figure out. The world doesn't move on truth alone. It moves on belief. It moves on influence. It moves when someone somewhere says the right words in the right tone at the right time, and suddenly doors open, minds shift, resistance melts, and people say the one word that changes everything. Yes, not because they were forced, not because they were tricked, but because something about that moment, something about you, gave them permission to believe, to trust, to follow, to take a chance. This is the art of persuasion. And let me be clear, this is not manipulation. This is mastery. The mastery of connection, the mastery of energy, the mastery of intent. Because when you truly understand what makes people say yes, you no longer chase opportunities, you create them. You don't hope for influence, you command it. You don't beg for attention, you earn it. With presence, with power, with purpose. And the first secret, the foundation of all persuasion is certainty. People do not follow need. They do not follow desperation. They do not follow indecision. They follow certainty. The one who moves people is the one who knows who they are, what they believe, and where they're going, and they say it like they mean it. If your voice trembles, the room will doubt. If your conviction is weak, the world will hesitate. But when your soul speaks with alignment, with conviction, with clarity, you don't just communicate, you transmit. Certainty is magnetic. It draws people in, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. And clarity is the rarest language of all. So I'll ask you, no. Were you clear on who you are? Because persuasion doesn't start with other people. It starts with persuading yourself. You must become the first believer in what you say. You must be sold on the value you bring. You must know in your bones that your offer, your message, your vision is worth leaning into. And if you don't believe it, no one else will. This is the internal work that fuels external power. Next comes the rhythm of words. The way you speak matters. Have you ever noticed how some people can speak a single sentence and the room quiets, while others ramble for hours and say nothing of weight? It's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Great persuaders speak with structure. They speak with music. Their words have a pulsy rise and fall, a cadence that feels inevitable. Not rushed, not chaotic intentional, because humans don't just respond to logic, they respond to feeling. They say, I don't know why, but I just feel like I can trust her. I can't explain it, but something about the way he said it, it stuck with me. That's not an accident. That's technique. That's tone. That's the art of landing your words in the nervous system, not just the brain. But none of that works without presence. Presence is persuasion's secret weapon. When you are truly here, when you are fully in the moment, not scattered, not rehearsing, not doubting, but rooted, people feel it. Presence is rare in a distracted world. And anything rare becomes valuable. So the moment you show up fully attuned, alert, listening, grounded, you become powerful. Most people live like ghost chaff, present, half distracted, half alive. But when you bring your whole self to a conversation, when your eyes say, I see you, when your energy says, I'm with you, when your words say, I understand you, people lean in, they open, they soften, and the gate to influence swings wide open. And let's talk now about the greatest tool in the persuader's arsenal. Questions. See, Amateurs speak to convince. Masters ask to uncover. Because the secret to getting people to say yes is not to tell them what they need, it's to help them realize it themselves. And nothing pulls truth from the soul faster than the right question. Why do you think that hasn't worked for you yet? What would it mean to finally get this handled? If you knew success was guaranteed, what would you do next? These are not random. These are precision tools designed to bypass the surface and hit the core. Because here's the truth. People don't change because of your advice. They change because of their own realizations. So the great persuader is not a preacher, they're a mirror. They hold space for clarity to emerge. They create conditions for truth to rise. They ask, they listen, and they reflect what others have been too afraid or too distracted to see. And then only then do they guide. Because persuasion is a dance, not a dictatorship. It's a rhythm of give and take, speak and pause, offer and wait, push and release. And just like a dance, it requires attunement to mood, to energy, to resistance. You don't bulldoze someone into yes. You invite them into it. You make the path appealing, obvious, irresistible. And the way you do that is through story. Facts tell, stories sell, because stories bypass skepticism. They slip under defenses. They make people feel something. A statistic makes you nod. A story makes you believe. You can say, 90% of people fail because they never take action. And someone might agree. But if you say, let me tell you about a man I knew talented, hungry, filled with potential, but he waited too long. He kept saying, next week, next year, when I'm ready. And when life finally handed him the opportunity, he had no fire left to take it. That hits different. That lands because we are wired for story. We see ourselves in story. And when someone sees themselves in your message, they say yes. Not because of you, but because of them. Because something clicked inside. Something lit up. Something said, this is me, and I need to move. So here's what you must remember. Persuasion is not about pushing. It's about awakening. It's not about conquest. It's about connection. It's not about getting your way. It's about showing someone their way more clearly, more powerfully, more vividly than they've ever seen it before. This is not about trickery. This is about transformation. And you can only lead others there if you've walked it yourself. So become persuasive not by learning tactics, but by becoming magnetic. By being so aligned with your message, so congruent with your energy, so present with your words, so generous with your intent, that people don't just hear you, they trust you. Because the most persuasive person in the room is not the one with the loudest voice, it's the one with the clearest spirit. And when your spirit speaks, the world says yes. There is another truth no one talks about enough. Persuasion, real persuasion, begins before a single word leaves your mouth. It begins with how you see the world, because your view of people determines your approach to people. If you see people as obstacles, you'll try to overpower them. If you see people as wallets, you'll try to sell them. But if you see people as mirrors, reflections of the same hunger, fear, longing, and hope that lives in you, then you don't try to conquer them, you connect. And when people feel that you see them not just as a means to an end, but as human, worthy, important, they listen. Not because you demanded attention, but because you earned resonance. You touched something ancient inside them. You reminded them that beneath the noise, the roles, the masks, we are the same. That's the paradox of persuasion. You become more powerful the moment you stop trying to win people and start trying to understand them. That's when everything shifts, because now you're not speaking at them. You're speaking from within them. And here's where clarity comes in. You cannot persuade if you are not clear. If your mind is foggy, your message will fumble. If your intention is scattered, your influence will fall flat. The world is full of noisome millions of voices shouting at once. So when you speak, you better make it count. You better speak with a blade. not a broom. Cut through, pierce through, hit the heart. That means before you open your mouth, you must ask yourself, what do I really want them to feel? What do I want them to know? What decision do I want them to make, not just in their mind, but in their bones? Clarity sharpens your energy, and people can feel when you're clear, just like they can feel when you're bluffing, when you're vague, when you're uncertain, even if your words are smooth. Don't underestimate the radar people have for realness. You want to be persuasive? Be clear. You want people to say yes? Give them a reason to trust your direction. Because clarity leads, and people want to follow someone who knows where they're going. Now let's talk about vision. Because persuasion isn't just about solving problems, it's about casting possibilities. The greatest persuaders don't just convince you to leave where you are. They paint a picture of where you could be. They hold a mirror to your potential, not just your pain. They don't say, you're broken, let me fix you. They say, you're powerful, and I'm here to wake it up. That's vision. Vision makes people rise. Vision makes people move. Because people aren't hungry for more products, more noise, more empty promises. They're hungry for meaning, for purpose, for a story worth stepping into. And if you can describe the future better than they can imagine it, they'll follow you straight into it. But here's the catch. You cannot give a vision you haven't seen yourself. You must have tasted it, touched it, believed it. You must speak of the mountaintop because you've climbed either because you're climbing it now. If your vision is borrowed, recycled, half believed, no one will follow you because we can't lead people into places we're not willing to go. So before you try to get anyone else to say yes, you need to say yes to your own vision, yes to the work, yes to the responsibility, yes to the pressure of carrying purpose in a world that celebrates noise over truth. And when your yes is real, when your yes has roots, others will feel it. Let's bring in the muscle that supports it all. Discipline. Because you can have clarity. You can have belief. You can even have vision. But if you don't have discipline, you will be inconsistent. And inconsistency kills persuasion. One day you're lit with energy. The next day you disappear. One day you're inspiring. The next day you're scrambling. And people notice because consistency builds credibility. Discipline says, you can count on me. I don't show up only when I feel like it. I show up because I said I would. You want to persuade others? Start by keeping the promises you make to yourself. If you say you're going to study, do it. If you say you're going to train, do it. If you say you're going to build, speak, write, lead, do it. Not perfectly, but persistently. Because when you respect your own word, others begin to trust it too. Discipline doesn't make you robotic. Discipline makes you reliable. And in a world filled with broken promises, unreliability, and fake charisma, being real, consistent, and clear is your greatest competitive edge. Let's now talk about what turns words into motion. Action. You can know all the techniques. You can read all the books. You can listen to all the speeches. But none of it matters until you use it. Until you test it. Until you risk hearing no. Because here's the truth, persuasion is not theory. It's practice. It's sweat. It's rhythm. It's rejection. It's recalibration. And every great persuader you admire today, they weren't born with the ability. They built it through awkward conversations, through feedback, through misfires, through refinement. So stop waiting until you know enough. Stop preparing endlessly. Stop thinking your confidence will come before you act. Confidence doesn't precede action. Confidence is the reward for courage. Say that again. Confidence is the reward for courage. It's the fruit of showing up again and again, even when your voice shakes, even when the room goes cold, even when they don't buy, even when they don't clap, because you're becoming the person who leads anyway. That's real power. That's real persuasion. And when people see that you don't flinch, that you don't back down, when the yes doesn't come immediately, they respect you. Because the world doesn't just need convincing voices. It needs convicted ones. ones that don't sway in the wind of opinion, ones that are rooted in principle, ones that act from alignment, not approval. And when your action matches your message, when your life is your pitch, people say yes before you even open your mouth. Because the world doesn't just need more voices, it needs more anchors. People who don't get blown away by rejection, people who aren't addicted to applause, people who can walk into a room, speak truth with calm fire, and leave even if no one claps knowing they did what needed to be done. That's rare, that's real, that's irresistible. You want to know what makes people say yes without hesitation? It's alignment. When your words match your energy, when your actions match your message, when your story matches your standards, you become undeniable. You become someone others want to follow, not because you told them to, but because they feel safer in your direction than in their own hesitation. And here's another truth. People don't just say yes to you. They say yes to who they become in your presence. They say yes to the version of themselves you reflect back to them. So, if you want to be more persuasive, stop obsessing over your pitch and start elevating your presence. Because presence creates permission. When someone feels seen by you, when someone feels understood by you, when someone feels lifted by the way you hold space for their highest self, they say yes because they want more of that. They want more of themselves, the way you showed them they could be. That's not sales, that's service. That's not closing, that's calling. Because great persuasion isn't about pushing people across the finish line, it's about drawing out the hero that's been waiting to rise. So now we arrive at one of the most overlooked, yet most potent pieces of persuasion. Gratitude. Yes, gratitude. Why? Because gratitude is grounding. Gratitude keeps your influence from turning into arrogance. It keeps your power pure. When you're grateful not just for outcomes, but for the opportunity to speak, to serve, to lead you, stop sounding like a manipulator and start sounding like a missionary. And people can feel that difference. Gratitude brings humility. Humility brings trust. And trust opens doors that strategy alone never could. When you enter a conversation with a heart full of appreciation, not entitlement, you don't try to extract value from others. You add value. You elevate. You uplift. You give without keeping score. And in doing so, people lean closer. They listen longer. And more often than not, they say yes. Not just to your offer, but to your energy. Let's move forward to something that separates the amateurs from the artists. Adaptability. Because you can be the most skilled speaker in the world, but if you can't read the room, you'll lose the room. If you can't sense when to lean in and when to pull back, if you can't pivot when someone's guard goes up, if you deliver a scripted monologue while ignoring the signals right in front of you, you become predictable. And persuasion dies in predictability. The greatest persuaders are not locked into scripts, they're synchronized with the moment. They listen, they feel, they observe, they respond. They adjust their tone, their pace, their volume, their story, not to manipulate, but to meet people where they are. Because if you meet people where they are, you can take them where they've never been. But if you preach from a distance, you'll never move them an inch. So ask yourself, are you trying to be impressive or impactful? Because adaptability is not weakness, it's wisdom. You're not changing your truth. You're changing your delivery so that the truth actually lands. This is where resilience enters. Because, let's be honest, there will be people who don't say yes. There will be doors that don't open. There will be audiences that stare blankly, clients who ghost you, critics who mock you, and even friends who doubt you. And in those moments, your ego will want to shut down, to pull back, to protect itself from rejection. But your mission has to be stronger than your pride. Because if one no can make you question your message, you were never carrying a message. You were carrying a need for approval. But if you can keep speaking truth even when it echoes, if you can keep showing up even when your voice trembles, if you can hold your ground not with aggression but with peaceful certainty, you become unshakable. And that is when people start to trust you. Because they're not just watching what you say, they're watching what you do when it's hard. Resilience is persuasive because when others fold and you stay, when others fade and you remain, when others doubt and you still deliver, people can't ignore you anymore because you've become something very few ever become. Reliable. Reliable people are rare, and what is rare becomes valuable. In a world where people quit at the first sign of discomfort, in a world where everyone wants to be heard but few want to listen, in a world where people show up only when it's easy, you become persuasive the moment you consistently do what others refuse to. You show up, not for attention, but out of alignment. You speak, not to impress, but to impact. You ask, not to control, but to connect. This is the kind of reliability that moves nations, the kind of reliability that builds movements, the kind of reliability that makes your yes powerful and your no respected. And now let's go to the final piece, learning. See, persuasion is not a final destination. It's not a medal you earn and hang on your chest forever. It's a practice, a process, a path of endless refinement. Because people change, culture changes, language shifts, contexts evolve. So the master persuader never stops learning. You study human behavior not out of manipulation, but out of curiosity. You listen, not just to respond, but to understand. You watch great communicators not to copy their tactics, but to understand their timing, rhythm, energy, because persuasion is as much about timing as it is about technique. It's the dance of knowing when to pause, when to punch, when to whisper, when to rise. And the only way to learn that is to keep showing up, to speak and stumble, to ask and misstep, to risk rejection again and again, not because you enjoy it, but because your mission matters more than your comfort. Learning makes you dangerous because now your message isn't frozen in time, it's alive. It breathes, it adapts, it grows. And people don't want perfection, they want real. They want someone who grows with them, who learns, adjusts, listens, applies, improves. Someone who doesn't pretend to know it all, but shows they're committed to getting better, to serving better, to communicating with excellence. And excellence is magnetic, not perfection excellence. Excellence says, I take this seriously. I honor your attention. I value your time. So I bring my best every time. That's what changes lives. Not a clever phrase, not a viral slogan, but a consistent, evolving, deeply human voice yours. A voice that has wrestled with doubt and chosen courage. A voice that has met rejection and chosen resilience. A voice that has failed and learned and stood back up not as a victim, not as a salesman, but as a leader. And so I leave you with this. If you want to be persuasive, become someone worth listening to. Not because you're the loudest, not because you know the most, but because you've earned your voice, because you've lived what you teach, because your presence calms the room, your story lifts the room, and your words move the room. That's persuasion, not a trick, not a script, but a transformation in you first and through you in others. So speak, stand tall, be clear, be grounded, serve, invite, connect, challenge, and always believe in what you're asking people to believe in. Because if you do that long enough, deep enough, loud enough with your life, you'll never have to push people to say yes. They'll say it willingly because the truth in your voice reminded them of the truth in their own. And that is the highest persuasion of all. Imagine this. You walk into a room and you don't need to speak loudly. No gimmicks, no proving. You simply stand there steady as a mountain. Your eyes don't seek approval, they offer trust. Your voice doesn't scream to be heard, it lands straight into people's hearts. Your presence silences the room. Not because you are intimidating, but because you are so clear, so grounded, so real, you cannot be ignored. And when you speak, people listen, not just with their ears, but with their entire being. Because in your words, they don't just hear your message, they hear their own calling. You're not persuading them for a yes. You're awakening what has been sleeping inside them. You're not manipulating, you're illuminating. You're not shouting, you're stirring. That is real power. Power that doesn't come from force, but from honesty, integrity, and the unshakable alignment of your soul. Power that doesn't come from making people believe in you, but from helping them believe again in themselves. And if there is one truth I want you to carve into your spirit, it is this. Persuasion does not begin with others. It begins with you. You are the message. You are the mirror. You are the gateway others will walk through to find the greatest version of themselves. And only when you live that truth, only when you commit to being a fire not to burn, but to ignite, you will not only persuade, you will transform the world.